know this verse. For some reason, back in my early days of Krishna Consciousness, this is one of the verses I know. We'll just start from the invocation. We'll have the businesses. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyan Tamadandasya Janam Shalakaya. Chakshurumanikam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivase Sasunyavadi Pastatya Deshatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So you said text number 36?
37, Raj.
Oh, 37. Okay, I'll read the question, Arjun. Oh, it goes back quite a ways. Okay. Well, this is Arjun's question. Arjuna Uvacha Atyati Sadayo Peto Yoga Chalati Manasaha Aprapya Yoga Samsiddhim Kamgit Gatim Krishna Agachati. Arjuna said, O Krishna, what is the destination of the unsuccessful transcendentalist who in the beginning takes the process of self-realization with faith, but who later desists due to worldly mindedness and thus does not attain the perfection of mysticism? So let me just read a few of the previous verses because this is a series of questions and answers by Krishna and Arjuna. And let's just go to text 33. I'll just read the translation. Arjuna asked, O Madhusudan, the system of yoga you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable for me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. So this is the Jnana Yoga, Hatha Yoga, going through the forest, sitting on a piece of kusa grass with the deer skin and the soft cloth. Complete, physical and mental celibacy, in a secluded place, away from everywhere, and simply just meditating in that way. And Arjuna's reply was that this yoga seems to be unendurable and impractical, very good word, because the mind is unsteady. The mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna, and to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind. So Krishna replies that Arjuna, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by two things, suitable practice and by detachment. For one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work. For those whose mind is controlled and strive by appropriate means is assured of success. That's Krishna's opinion. That is my opinion. So now Arjuna is accepted that someone can take up this path. They can take up this path of yoga, or the path that he's accepted Krishna's explanation here. But he wants to know what happens if we don't make it. What happens to the people who take your word, Krishna, accept what Krishna is saying here, And then in the beginning, they have a lot of enthusiasm. We've seen this throughout the years in the Hare Krishna movement, and with not even the Hare Krishna movement, just in life in general. People tend to have a very enthusiastic beginning, a midlife crisis, and then change of occupation, change of, life gives you some changes a lot of times. And so Arjuna wants to know what happens for people that take up the process, but there's something in the heart that, I guess, perks up. It rises up, and this is known as sinful desires. This was very, what would you say, carefully described in the 3rd chapter, where Arjuna asked Krishna, Artikena Prayuktayam Papam Kardati Purusha Nichan Ape Barsha Barsha Eva Niyojita. By what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if being engaged by force? In other words, something else is making me decide to be sinful, even though I don't want to be sinful. And Krishna explains what is it? I know the verse, but that it is lust only. It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of the mode of passion, and it goes down into the mode of ignorance, and from there it's described as the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. I looked that up for some reason. I couldn't remember the Sanskrit. Although that's one of the verses in Bhagavad also. Oh, Kama Esha, Krodha Esha, Rajagun, Samun, Vavaha, Mahasano, Mahapapam, Vidyenam, Ihavairinam. It is lust only. It is lust only. So, Prabhupada, Krishna kindly, it gives instructions. In other words, because or the nature of lust. Sometimes Prabhupada says desire. Sometimes he says lust. But he uses these two words interchangeably. Lust seems like a very, very vicious thing. Desire seems like you can take it or leave it. Lust kind of seems like you don't have a choice. Desire seems like, okay, I may have a desire, but it's controllable. So there's different levels there. So it's described that this, just like the Prabhupada, Krishna gives example, just as fire is covered by smoke, or the mirror is covered by dust, or the embryo is covered by the womb, we, the living entities, get covered to different degrees by this lust or desire. You can see that desire may be on the lower level, lusty desire may be the middle one, and then just straight out lust, and you just can't control yourself. So that different kind of coverings can be there, and that the living entities, pure consciousness. In other words, this is our constitutional position: is that we are, by nature, we are pure. By nature, we're pure, and that purity of heart is now just covered by the material energy, and that covering is known as kama, lust or desire, as being described here. And the nature of that desire is that it can never be satisfied in the material world. And I've given this explanations many times before, because the nature, what's happening is by nature and that'll be, it's described in these purports to these verses from 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, and 41. It's described that the spirit soul is pure by nature. And when the living entity leaves the spiritual world, it enters into the material world. It's just like when you're in the spiritual world, there's something called prema, pure love. Now that pure love, it is, in one sense, it's unsatiable. In other words, anandam bodhi vardhanam, as Shikshastikam says, It's an ocean of ever-increasing transcendental happiness. And that because the pleasure in the spiritual world is always increasing, our hankering for that pleasure is also increasing. But when the living energy enters into the material atmosphere, we fall in the material world, and that prema, that desire, that ocean of spiritual happiness gets turned over into lust. It goes from prema to kama. And what happens is that kama, in as much as the prema is unsatiable in one sense in the spiritual world, but it's insatiable in a good thing. But in the material world, what happens is that now we're trying to find that prema in the material world, and it doesn't exist here. There's no space for that prema here, and that's why it burns like fire. In other words, no matter how much fuel you put in the fire will consume it. In the same way, no matter how much, I guess you could say, sense objects we give our senses, the senses are never going to be satisfied. They'll never be satisfied. Even, I mean, that at a certain point you can't eat anymore. But then, 24 hours, maybe at least 48 hours later, you're going to want to have something to eat. We can have some temporary satiation, but that's not the type of satiation we're looking for. And Krishna is very kind, because he describes Indriya Mana Buddhi. He describes that the sitting places of lust is Indriya, the senses, Mana, the mind, and Buddhi, it's the intelligence. So these three places is the sitting places of lust, and it covers our real knowledge. And when our real spiritual knowledge is covered, then we become bewildered, or we fall under the influence of the material energy deeper and deeper and deeper. And we begin to identify ourselves as something that we're not. And this is the basic problem in the material world, is that we think that we're this material body. Somehow or another, if we can just get to that level, like Prabhupada explains, at least theoretically, we can come to this point. To come to this point factually is a very, very challenging, But Krishna also gives the way out. He gives the way out. He says, Tasmat Tvam Indriyanyarda Niyamya Bharatarsabaha. He said, therefore, which is the concluding statement to these verses from 36 up to 41 here, which is the 41st verse. And he said, and he explains, Tasmat Tvam Indriyanyarda Niyamya Bharatarsabaha. In the very beginning, niyama, regulate the senses. That's all you have to do, is regulate the senses. Yama, niyama, asanam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and get into meditation, slowly get into a little, maybe you can creep up higher up into the levels of concentration like that. But at least niyama. It's like I've given the example that I learned from a friend, that this Yama, it's just like, there's also somebody that has that name, Yamaraj, right? Yamaraj, he has that name, Yama. So Yama means control. So the king of controllers is Yamaraj. So we can voluntarily do all that down here. We can voluntarily, like Krishna was saying in that verse, it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. There's a suitable practice. There's a practice that's suitable for each and every one of us. The practice is overall, it's like an umbrella. It's like an umbrella practice. But everyone has a position within that umbrella. Someone may want to be a brahmachari, someone may want to be a grihastha, someone may want to be vanaprastha at a certain stage, someone may want to take sannyas, someone may have a brahminical inclination, or kshatriya inclination, or Vaishya inclination, Shudra inclination. And so by persevering, in other words, just by practice, we take up one of those varnas and ashrams. We take one of those up, and we utilize that varna and we utilize that ashram to gain spiritual strength. And we gain spiritual knowledge, which gives us spiritual strength. And that spiritual strength gives us a chance to become detached. We get into the 12th chapter. At the end of those to walk, just think of me always, okay, then you just do bhakti yoga, okay, we can't do that, and you can't do that. And finally, Krishna just says, okay, just be detached. Better than detachment is meditate, better, but it can only just be detached. Just find some way to give your stuff away. Be kind to other people. Be generous to other people. Help other people. Not be so concentrated on our own self, but think of others. You can see this in children. When they're first born, it's me, 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 me. Then it becomes, and then it adds on one and add on two. Pretty soon they add on a few more. Then later on, it's me, 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 me again. That just seems like the trajectory of how those things go. But we add these things on, and so under that umbrella of Bhakti Yoga, we can find a position whereby we can actually come to the point of detachment. So in the very beginning, Krishna says we must curb this great symbol of sin, lust, common, the great symbol. In other words, this is the emblem. This is the what would you say, the gold standard. This is what's gonna cause us bewilderment in this material world. And he says by regulating the senses. Doesn't say by giving up. No, just like the my bodies, they say absolutely nothing. You got to just become one. You got to merge. And which is actually, when you really think about it, not a very wise idea, because even I remember, I think Tamal Krishnamaraj told me one time that they were living in some kind of like new age, I guess it's not new age, old age camp and stuff like that. And they were trying to get detached, but like once a month they would go down the hill to the milkshake shop and indulge in a milkshake or something. They could only go so long. Kind of like, like that's all I can stand. I can't stand anymore. I gotta go have a milkshake or something. They have to like give in at a certain point. And so, and that's the challenge. That's the challenge. So just regulate the senses. Allow the senses a little bit of latitude. Allow, or a little, have a leash. In the beginning, give them enough so that they don't feel just a little bit. They can feel the fact that they can't go all the way over the edge because the chain stops them. But there's some space in between there and being fully detached at heart. There's some space in between there for us to, live our lives. There's one purport in the Bhagavad-gita where there's actually one verse where it describes that we can actually perform our duties in this world and attain perfection and actually be happy while we're doing it. In other words, there's a sense of happiness in the material world that comes from living in the mode of goodness, basically. We can just get to the mode of goodness. We'll have a sense of tranquility, peacefulness. And then when we engage Krishna consciousness in there, and we utilize Krishna consciousness to develop our spiritual intelligence, then we have a chance to control the wicked mind. Without transcendental intelligence, there's no chance of controlling the mind. And if the verse is that if the mind is not peaceful, the mind is not controlled, there's no chance of attaining a peaceful state of existence. That means mode of goodness, peaceful. That's the mode of goodness. And without peace, there's no sense of happiness. So it goes from the point of getting transcendental spiritual knowledge. That transcendental spiritual knowledge allows us to deal with the restless mind. When the restless mind is being tamed, the heart becomes a little more peaceful. And once the heart is settled, then there's a chance to have happiness. Or we can do that materially, or we can add on and go from goodness to Sudasattva, which means spiritual goodness. And we can utilize that platform to engage in devotional service. And that can be, and that devotional service can be achieved by anyone in any ashram and in any varna. I'm listening to these wonderful, wonderful lectures from 1977, where literally the microphone is on in Prabhupada's room like all day long. I mean, I don't know if it's all day long, but these lectures are going on and on and on. You'll hear Hari Sari in the room, you'll hear Adi Keshava in the room, you hear Tamal Krishna Maharaj, you hear Brahmananda in there, you'll hear so many devotees coming and going. And they're just flooding Prabhupada with information about how the movement's going. And it's 1977. Prabhupada's slowing down a little bit. And it's just like amazing. Prabhupada was saying, it doesn't matter what ashram you're in, doesn't matter if you're working outside. I think it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj that was explaining to Prabhupada that now some of our devotees are getting regular jobs. It was like, whoa, people getting regular jobs. It was like, what a brilliant idea. And he was explaining to Prabhupada, it's actually a good thing, because it's like we have our building on 55th Street in New York, the big skyscraper, and people think it's full of beggars. It says Hare Krishna people going out to beg every day. Can you imagine? There's like 200 devotees living there. Everyone's walking out with candles or flowers or candy canes. 40 Santa Clauses come out of the Hare Krishna temple one day, or something like that. So, but he was saying that because this was a time when there was we were accused by ex-devotees of brainwashing. The deprogrammers got a law case against us. And it was really a serious case. And so Tamal Krishna was saying that I seen devotees have regular jobs is like a good thing. And Prabhupada said, yes, they're working inside, working outside. What is the difference? For Prabhupada, there was no difference. Working inside or outside, he would say they must chant their rounds. They must, follow the regular principles. But inside or outside, there's no difference in Krishna. Krishna's inside and outside are the same. So in the same way, whether we're working inside the the management of the movement or the activities of the movement, or we're employed by some, I think the word they use, gainfully employed, as if material gain is the only gain, but that's not true. We all know that the spiritual gain is the real gain, but at least we have to maintain ourselves. And so in order to do that, Prabhupada was saying, yes, this is good, this is okay, this is good. And so we find ourselves under that umbrella, and we learn the art of regulating our senses. And that's a fine-tuning thing. It's a fine-tuning thing. And what this does, the result of regulating the senses is that it literally slays, or it curbs, or the destroyer of our spiritual knowledge. In other words, again, our knowledge has become weakened. When we fall in material energy, we become covered by the material energy. And we begin to misidentify ourselves with this material body. We lose our spiritual understanding. So this lust actually destroys that. It destroys that knowledge. And it also destroys the urge for self-realization. These two things Prabhupada brings up in that purport for that 41st verse, where it describes that this lust or kama, it destroys the urge of self-realization. Because whenever I read this the first, or maybe I don't know if it's the first time, but one of the times I read this, when I read the Bhagavad-gita a lot, is that, like Prabhupada says that in the introduction to the Srimad Bhagavatam, that everybody looks up the sky at night and wonders, what is going on? What is all this? That's the urge. That's like an urge for knowledge, or an urge for self-realization. And then Prabhupada said, and specifically knowledge of our spiritual self. These two things, in other words, that even the urge to inquire is destroyed, and then that will destroy the urge to understand our true spiritual nature, And so this is the question that Arjuna wants to know, that if I take up spiritual life, and I'm not successful, is there anything? Of course, now we have to go back, because Krishna has already touched on this in the beginning of taking taking, what did you say, the analytical part of the second chapter, where he describes, never was there a time that I do not exist, not this material body, he knows minyatana dehe, matash pashas tukuntiya. So he goes to that whole list of items of what the soul is or isn't. Najayate, Mriyate, it's unborn, eternal, existing, undying, primeval. When the body, Hanyate, Hanimane, when the body is slain, the soul is not slain. And he goes to this whole thing telling Krishna is telling Arjuna, you're not this material body. And then he tells him you're a Kshatriya. This is the point. That's one of my favorite things that Krishna does. You're not the body, you're not the body, not the body. By the way, you are a Kshatriya. That's your body. Your body is a Kshatriya. But then the first point where he brings, what would you call it, karma yoga, which leads by dovetailing our action, karma yoga, connecting our karma, our activities to Krishna. The connecting our activities to Krishna is called karma yoga, which leads to bhakti yoga. But ultimately, we dovetail our natures in the service of Krishna, and this allows us to gain purity of heart, so that the heart becomes cleansed. And so, in that verse, Nehabi karmanastasti patravaya navijate swakam apyasha dharmasha trayate mahato bhaya. He tells Arjuna in this endeavor. Now, this is not in the analytical part, not the part that you're the body, but in this endeavor that I'm going to tell you, because the verse previous to that one is, now I'm going to tell you how you can work, how you can take this knowledge that I've just given you, and how you can work that knowledge. And when you do that, nehabi kamanasati patravaya navijate, in this endeavor, this karma yoga endeavor, there's no loss and there's no diminution. And a little bit of practice in this process can protect one from the most dangerous types of fear. One of the places Prabhupada says is the fear of not being able to have at least a human form of life where we can engage in Krishna consciousness. There are certain places where he mentions that that's one of the fears that we have. And so now Arjuna is going to have to connect all this karma yoga up, and now we're just getting to the end. We're just getting to the end of this karma yoga section of the Gita. We're just coming to the end. And Arjuna is asking, what's going to happen? What's really going to happen? So he said, it is undoubted. He said that, what is the destination? What's going to happen to me? Because Arjuna, you have to remember, he's in the middle of a battlefield. This is high stake. This is the high stakes event. This is like, it's winner take all. Basically, that's what it means. Winner take all. Winner take all. So who in the beginning of the process of self-realization is now he's understanding who he is in this process of self-realization with faith. So we've already got to that point where we have given, we have a trust. We have a trust in spiritual life. We have a trust in this. We've heard so much up to this point. We've heard so many things. That those who are intelligent don't take the senses and engage the senses and the object of the senses, because they know that that actually is a source of misery. It's not a source of pleasure, it's a source of misery. Because if we become attached to those objects of sense gratification, they're going to be ripped away from us at a certain point. And that's going to be painful. So better not to get attached to anything other than we've already been attached to, and just start working on the ones that we've built up for now, and not try to do our best not to gain any more. And so he wants to know that because he feels himself, he said, this is impractical. This is not possible. So he's feeling himself deficient to follow this process. So what happens to one who's deficient and doesn't attain perfection in this mystic process of devotion, of this karma yoga? So that's just a little introduction to the text today. Any comments or questions or reflections on those four, well, I guess it was 3 or 4 verses from this chapter and 3 or 4 verses from the 3rd chapter, how we're trying to connect them together. Mars, I do have a question. Please ask. Oh, wait a second. Oh, I'm typing. Okay. Yes, Kishore Priya.
Hare Krishna
Oh,
Maharaj.
excuse me, Kishori Priya.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Dandavat Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada. So you mentioned that we have this illusion that we are the material body. And you also spoke about, how the intelligence is superior to the mind. Mm-hmm. And that is the one when the intelligence is covered, that's when the mind gets deluded. But I was also wondering, where we have 2 other elements of the subtle body, which is the consciousness and the ego, the false ego. Mm-hmm. So where does this sit, that I am this material body? Does it sit with the ego? Is that connected with the ego? Is there a hierarchy is what my question is.
That's a very good question, actually. In that purport to that verse, Indriya Mana Buddhi, Srila Prabhupada explains that very, very carefully there. I can even turn to it so I can get it 100% right. But he sets it up like the sense objects are stronger than the senses. Okay. You ever walk by, I don't know, you walk by a pizza place, all of a sudden you want pizza, what do they call that? Spontaneous buying. They have a word for that. You walk by a place where they make bread, you can smell the bread being made. So that's the sense object is more powerful than our sense. So it can overcome our sense. So Prabhupada says, first of all, the senses become infected. The senses become infected. So I'll just read the purport here because it's very interesting to that verse because it gives us an advantage. It says the enemy has captured different strategic positions of the body of the conditioned soul. Remember, Indriya, Mana, Buddhi, those 3 places. Therefore, Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Nowadays, we don't have that. We don't know where the enemy are. They're terrorists and stuff. But if we knew where they were, we'd have a fighting chance. Right? So Prabhupada says here, mind is the center of all activities of the senses. The mind is known as the 6th sense. So the sense object, that'll be described in verse 42 and 43 of the 3rd chapter. That goes into that. And so what happens is that we get this we senses detect. They smell something, they see something, they hear something, the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. 5 working senses, but specifically the 5 knowledge acquiring senses bring us information. And so Prabhupada says here, the mind is the center. It's the 6th sense. Struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind, as the verse goes. So the mind is the center of all activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas for sense gratification. So now we got the information from the senses. Now the mind takes over. The mind becomes the reservoir of all ideas for sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and senses become repositories of lust. In other words, they become the places where the karma resides. And Prabhupada says, really nice. Next, the intelligent department becomes the capital of such desires or lust. It's described here, such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. So you see in the nature there. Lusty intelligence influences the spiritual, influence the spirit soul to acquire false ego. The lusty intelligence is infected. so it influences the intelligence, influences us, the spirit soul, to acquire a false ego and identify itself with matter. False ego means to identify ourselves with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. So now the intelligence is polluted, creates a false ego, a false identity, and that false identity, that false ego, that ahankara, now takes over. It's already got the intelligence, and it gets the mind, and it gets the senses. And so what happens is that we end up, as being described here, that the spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that's in the, I think it's from the 10th canto, which is a very famous verse. So you see how that works. In other words, it's a combined effort. In other words, all four of those things, we, the spirit soul, our senses, our mind, our intelligence, and then the false ego, these things are all under the influence now of material nature, the three modes of material nature, which cover the material energy. And the thing is like, this is one of my, I came up with this one, I get this one. So and this is where I got my saying from. It says the spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying material senses and mistakes that is true happiness. So just like an alcoholic, he's hurting himself, or a drug addict, or there's somebody, there's like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, NA, Narcotics Anonymous. There's, I don't even know, there's probably a dozen different anonymouses out there. You're not anonymous anymore. And so the idea is that I would tell the devotees, we have in the Hare Krishna, we have sense gratifiers anonymous, SGA, sense gratifiers anonymous. We go before the deities. Hi, my name is Maharaj, and I'm an addict. I'm an SGA, and we have our 16 rounds and 4 regular principles. Read some little scripture, associate, and I mean that's what those associate, AA, NA, they're all about association with people who want to overcome their addictions. So if we want to overcome our material desires to load it over the material world or to have sense gratification, sadhusanga, so important, so very, very. So this is how it works. We're actually a spirit soul, and that spirit soul is sitting, Videshi Arjuna Tishta, resides within the heart, right? And it's just covered. It's still the same spirit soul. It still has its original swarup with Krishna, although that it's just been covered over now. It's just been covered over. Krishna's not, but we're covered. It's just like when we say, oh, the sun's covered. The sun's never covered. The sun is never covered. Only the person trying to see the sun gets covered. And so we get covered by the material energy, and therefore we misidentify ourselves. And so does that help? I mean, that beautiful purport, isn't it? I mean, it's just such a wonderful purport. So one of the top, I guess it's in the top 10 purport.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Any other comments? Or let's see, somebody was writing something. I didn't want to speak. Okay. Whoop. Okay. Okay. Attachment is not good, but is it okay getting attached to Guru? Don't have a spiritual guide, but I'm working on it. It's nice. I feel connected and see Maharaj as a reflection of Krishna. So I develop anxiety. What if for some reason I have to choose another Guru, since mostly everybody is old? Forgive me if I have not quoted things right. I appreciate your advice. Spiritual attachment. I want to make sure I get this right, because I don't want to, I want to make sure I really answer this question properly. It's a very good question. Because attachment on the spiritual level is a development of faith, adoshada. You have that first verse, it goes through different things. And it leads up to prema bhakti, leads up to prema. And so to have attachment for a spiritual teacher is good. And how about it? For some reason, I remember I just read this recently, and Prabhupada explains that it's in the, I think it's in the Nectar of Instruction, I think it's verse 7, where he describes that we're chanting Hare Krishna in remote places of the world. People haven't even heard of it. With my understanding, it was like Africa someplace. And he said that they have no idea what the chanting is, but they're becoming attracted so much so that they're shaving their heads and going around and chanting Hare Krishna. And Prabhupada said that imitation of a good thing is good. I mean, if they were imitating something bad, it would be bad, but as long as it's something good, and Krishna consciousness is definitely something good. And so to be spiritually attached, in other words, to be attached to gaining spiritual understanding, to be attached to doing things, what it means is that we have sown the seed of Shraddha, faith. That there's it takes a little bit of faith to begin, a little bit of understanding for it to develop. And then we have the association of devotees, and slowly you go to the point of initiation or different things like that. And so that when the question, just want to make sure I keep the point on this question. I don't have a spiritual guide, but I'm working on it. This is very good, because this is that process that one develops faith, and from that faith one gets association. From association one will get knowledge. From that knowledge one will seek a spiritual master, and it just builds up and up and up to the point. So it seems like you're working in the right direction. Not seems like, you are working in the right direction according to scripture. We want to be a little more definitive on that rather than seems like. It is like, it is. It is a normal, we just say, path that people follow as they grow in spiritual understanding. They begin to understand the need for a spiritual teacher. In other words, the spiritual teacher in the beginning can just be something that some people have and some people don't have, or something, whatever it may be. It can be a vague thing. But as one gains spiritual knowledge, or gains access to spiritual knowledge, then this opens up something. And I was talking to a devotee the other day who didn't have much association with his spiritual master, and was wondering, and I was explaining to him that in one sense we don't choose our spiritual master. The spiritual master is actually sent. Yasya prasada bhagavat prasada yasya prasada bhagavat. With the mercy of the spiritual master, one gets Krishna. With the mercy of Krishna, one gets a spiritual master. And that last verse of the morning program. So it's often explained that by the mercy of Krishna, one gets Guru. And by the mercy of the Guru, then one gets Krishna. Because there's always an intermediary. In other words, if they have a saying, if you have yourself as a doctor, you have a fool for a patient. If you have yourself as a teacher, you have a fool for a student. It doesn't work that way. And when we take a look, everything is always, everything we learn, everything in life, we learn from somebody. Somebody teaches us something. We see something, we hear something, we smell something. Somebody is teaching us something somewhere, somehow. And so when it comes to spiritual life, if we think we can just wing it, as they say, I can just wing this. I mean, literally, it's the most important decision we can make in life. And the spiritual master is Shakshadaritre Nasta Shastra Kintupavorya Priya Eva. He's dear to Krishna because he's serving Krishna. And probably would often say, my spiritual master has sent all of you to me. The spiritual master has sent all of you to me. Why? So we can serve you. So the teacher can serve the student. It's not like the teacher is some Wizard of Oz. What was that thing? I don't know. There's some vague memory from my childhood. It's just not some impersonal, formless, but it's given by Krishna, and it's to help us understand our eternal relationship with God. And this we need help. And Krishna recommends it throughout the scripture. Tadvidi paripashena panipashena sevaya pradeksham. That one should approach a spiritual master. This is Krishna. He says one should approach a spiritual master, render service, inquire submissively. And in this way, one will understand the truth. And so, to come to the point where one has enough faith to even inquire, it's an amazing, what would you say, step in one's sojourn in the material world. That word sojourn. In other words, our spiritual journey, our evolutionary journey within this material world. To come to this point where one wants to hear. And if you listen to the early lectures in 1966 in New York, probably would be saying, just try to hear. Just try to hear. Because through the oral reception, actually that reminds me of an email I'm supposed to read, submissive oral reception. But this submissive oral reception is so important because it has the potency to, as being described here, or the third chapter, was to take away the doubt. Our illusion right now is that we doubt. And it's a sign of intelligence to doubt. But too much doubt is a sign of madness. It's like the infinite regress. What caused that? What caused that? What caused that? You get into the Aristotle's like infinite regress, and at some point you just go so crazy you can't function anymore because there's no absolutes for you. And so Krishna consciousness, by following the direction of the spiritual master, one gets Krishna. And that's the process that Krishna set up. We can't make up our own process. Krishna is God is definitely a greater entity than any one of us. And so we must follow his protocol. We can't make our own rules and regulations for understanding God or foreseeing God. We can't make that up. Yeah, see as Father as a guide. Yes, the Father will guide the child, the mother guides the child, the family guides the child, community guides the child. So we have all aspects, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. We even have a checks and balance to make sure that we're proceeding properly. There's the alignment of the tires is correct. There's the in toe and the out toe. So we got to make sure it's right in the middle, so we don't wear all our tires. So this is a very good question. It's just Susmita. That's what it was. Yeah, Susmita. And I wish you luck in trying, as you go through, to find someone that you can find that faith and have that faith. Because without that, there's he who doesn't have faith is lost in this world. If you don't have that, you become lost. Well, it's already 5 to 8. This class goes until 8. Right? Yeah. So I guess we could go for, I guess we don't have time to read that long purport. And we'll read it next week. Any reflections or feedback from the esteemed group? Don't all speak at the same time. You turned your microphone on, Sarva.
Yeah, Maharaj, it says that for someone that does spiritual activities, benefit is never lost. But someone who does material activities, it's not guaranteed that the result will be there. I don't remember exactly where it mentioned that in one of the purports.
Can you repeat that? Because I don't quite follow it.
The transcendentalist who does spiritual activities, the result of the spiritual activities is continue in the next lifetime. It's not lost. But someone that does material activities, if they don't finish it in one lifetime, they won't get the benefit or something like that.
And that's the purport that they have become an Asasipa 240. And so Prabhupada explains that if on the spiritual path, whatever you gain in this lifetime, if you become 10% God conscious in this lifetime, next lifetime you begin working on 11. But in the purport, he explains that any work begun on the material plane has to be completed, otherwise the whole attempt becomes a failure. Any work begun in Krishna consciousness has a permanent effect, even though not finished. Wonder such work is therefore not at a loss, even in his work in Krishna consciousness. 1% done in Krishna consciousness bears permanent results, so that the next beginning is from the point of 2%, whereas in material activity, the 100% success is no process, no profit. So later on, Prabhupada gives example or some place where on this same topic that the skyscraper building, if you don't complete it, you don't ever get to live in it. But it's also known that Prabhupada would say certain things like Ravi Shankar have been practicing sitar for 7 lifetimes to get to the point where he could play the sitar as well as he has. And so there are some. It's not like if this lifetime I develop a certain amount of intelligence, in the next lifetime it's going to be down to 0. And that all depends on karma. In other words, if I do sinful things, then my education may be taken away from me. But if I do moderate things or pious things, I can keep it. So it all depends on our activities. It all depends on our activities. So some activities are spiritual. We have that description in the 4th chapter, that one who sees action and inaction and inaction and action, and you can understand what is sinful action, there's a whole section there that describes this. And we want to perform those things which are create spiritual reaction. Spiritual reaction. In other words, spiritual credit. We don't want to come back into the material world because we build a hospital in our next lifetime, we'll come back healthy. We build a school in this lifetime, next time we come back with a good education. That's not our goal. We have no interest in it. Probably was six. Oh man, whew. You should have heard the lecture. I mean, I can't even. I literally wouldn't repeat the lecture I heard. Not even a lecture. It was like a room conversation. The problem was so heavy. So every single thing. I mean, he said that brain is the stool. Their brain is stool. That's all that's in there. They don't have it because it was about this brainwashing case. 1970, it was 1976. And I was in Mayapur that year, 77, when the case was won. We actually won that case, and the International Society for Krishna Consciousness was stamped a bona fide religion, and it was like a huge victory for Prabhupada. And Prabhupada went on and on and on and on. Their brain is stool. The brain is stool. It's just stool. It's just full of stool. We have to clean it. It is our duty to clean it. If we don't wash their brain, what can they do? It's only stool. It's only stool. I mean, I couldn't even, at a certain point, I'm just saying, how many times is he going to say the brain is stool? It was like Adi Kesha was in the room, Tamal Krishna was in the room, Harisari was there, and it was probably put his thumb on it, and he wasn't going to let it go. He said, they have no brain. They have no brain. They don't even know who they are. They have no idea what they're doing. And he has them read from the 16th chapter of the Gita, all the demoniac qualities. And he said, yes, no brain. Yes, no brain. Brain is stool. Brain is stool. Didn't even say cow dung. This time, usually probably sometimes we'll say the brain is full of cow dung. It wasn't even cow dung. It was just bang, 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 bang. And every time someone would say something proper, wouldn't even would entertain the thought, just kept going. He wanted them to understand that this Krishna consciousness will prevail if we prevail. So we just have to understand ourselves, the value of Krishna consciousness, and try to explain. He said, take all what was the number? 80 some books. He said, take our 86 books, I think it was. Give it to the judge, tell him to read all the books, and when he's finished reading all the books, tell us if we're kidnapping or brainwashing the kids. Make them read every one of them. And he said, if nothing else, it'll prolong the case. Probably a little shrewd.
So could you say that Ravi Shankar would pick up where he left off with the sitar in the next life, but we don't want to come back in another life playing the sitar or doing
No. Jamani Ishwari. My only prayer is that birth after birth, I have the association with Krishna. My only desire.
Thank you.
That is, we have a focused desire. We're willing to go anywhere and everywhere for Prabhupada. The devotee doesn't care. It's not that we don't care. It's because we do care. We do care about the Hare Krishna movement. We do care what Prabhupada's created. And wherever he wants to send us, we're ready to go. And whoever's the temple commander at that time and space and place, wherever that may be, if we recognize him, if we don't recognize him, we're soldiers. We're soldiers in Krishna's army. Imagine if Prabhupada came and said, you have to go do this right now. What would you say? Oh, well, I'm a little busy with, No, Your life would be useless. Wherever Prabhupada wants us to go, that's where we go. When and where we go, that's not ours to decide. That's up to even Sanatana Goswami wanted to give up his body. Chaitanya says, "You think that body belongs? You've already given that body to me. You don't have the right to take that body. You don't have a right to do that. I have a right to do that, but you don't have a right to do it because that body's already been given to me." Okay, we're a little bit past 8 o'clock. I like to keep things timely. Turn it back over to her grace, Jari, DD.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much for such a sweet and touching class. It just made me think of when you were speaking about how mercy flows through the devotees, and it's so important. I was just thinking, like, so if the mercy flows through the devotees to us, then is that connection? So I guess it's just kind of a little quick question. Is that connection through, like, does the devotee who the mercy flows through, is there free will involved in that? Or is it that I'm meant to have that good fortune? Like, is it my good fortune, or is it the free will or decision of the devotee who the mercy comes through?
Boy, Prabhupada says that Krishna says, don't disturb those who are ignorant. But in the purport, he says, devotees are more merciful than Krishna because they go out and they force. They're more merciful. And as transparent as the person giving the information, it's compared to like radio signal on like a radio station. I think that's right. I know they still have radio stations. But now you don't have, like sometimes if the CD's not in there, the radio comes on my car. I have proper CDs in there. And sometimes when the youth use my car, they forget the and so, but you don't have to do, remember when I was a kid, it was like, and you had to like really tune it in really, really carefully. Or like when I was a kid, they didn't have cable TV. They had what we called rabbit ears. I don't know why they called them rabbit. They called them rabbit ears. And we would stick pieces of tin foil on them or a hook and a hanger on it to make it more receptive so that the station would come through. We used to call it snow. The screen wasn't clear. We used to call it snow on the screen. Sometimes it would flip. The screen would just flip or something. I don't know what that is. Anyway, so in as much as we become the proper recipient, in other words, we tune it, in other words, that submissive oral reception again. Submissively hearing, but not blindly following, submissively hearing and submissively inquiring. Submissive hearing and submissive inquiring are very, very important. And Arjuna was an exemplar of that submissive inquiry because Krishna told him, I spoke this 120 million, I told you this before 120 million years ago. And Arjuna said, how am I to understand? There must be something wrong with me because I'm seeing things different. That's submissive inquiry. And so through submissive inquiry, we tune in our ability to receive that. And in as much as we chant the holy name of the Lord, and in as much as we chant try to avoid the 10 offenses or to avoid the 10 offenses, I don't like the word try so much a lot, to avoid the 10 offenses, to clearly have a specific time, place that we're going to chant and do our chanting properly, follow the regulated principles, only eat Krishna Prasadam because everything else is unworthy. We just make an offering. It's so simple. Just offer everything that we eat to Krishna. And the heart will, Prabhupada says, it's like a vaccination for an epidemic disease. Amazing how Prabhupada put that in his purport. You take the vaccine to, and the prasadam is like a vaccine. Protects us from the material elements that mana, that indriya mana buddhi, the influences of the modes of nature that are contained within our own senses. Our senses are controlled by the modes of material nature. We're attracted to blue, or we're attracted to green, or we're attracted to yellow, or attracted to, and we think we're choosing. Prakriti, Kriyamanani, Guna Karmani, and we think, yeah, I'm choosing green, I'm choosing blue, I'm choosing purple, I'm choosing this. It's just the modes of nature acting. We have nothing to do with that. We're just being forced by the laws of material nature to think this is beautiful, this is not beautiful, this is tasty, this is not tasty, this smells good, this doesn't smell good. Nothing here smells good. Nothing here, prasad tastes good. Prasad smells good. But in the material world, there is, it's all yuck. So however much you can tune yourself in to that information that's flowing down, that's how much we get. Now we really went over 10 minutes.
Thank you, Maharaj.
But if the host throws in the question and
that's a really powerful meditation to have, just to keep that in mind. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us. It's always so nice to have you here. So I would first like to welcome everybody and giving a big Haribol to Maharaj for joining us this evening. Hare Krishna, Haribol Maharaj. Thank you. Maharaj Ki Jai. Everybody, please feel free to unmute.
Haribol Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Lindy Vilasini's, this is her first Bhagavad.
I put some announcements in the chat. If devotees would like, on April 9th in Houston, they will be chanting and distributing prasadam at the Art Car Parade. So please join if you're in the neighborhood. Haribol, if you would like to unmute and say Hare Krishna to Maharaj, please do so.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Krishna Kalindi Vilasini. She's 19 weeks old today, right? 19 weeks old today?
Yes, Maharaj.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
How's she doing?
She's good.
She's doing great.
Oh, Kalpachuru, Hare Krishna. Looks like you're in the Pujari room.
Always put this on Friday night program.
Thank you.
Ganga Mata and her.
That's nice.
Nice to see
Yeah,
you.
do some double. You get like. What was there? When I was a kid, they had that kind of ad. There's Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. That's nice.
Yes, we
There
really
was some
enjoyed
kind
it.
of
Thank
ad for
you.
like 2 mints in one. Remember, you get 2 mints, double mint, 2 mints in one. I can't remember what it, they get credit for doing Pujari service and listening to Bhagavad-gita, so they get two savers in one. Oh, no, it's just anyway, we'll see you next time on May Day.